Just hit it while it goes red. We going? Good to see everybody tonight. Alan's back there all by himself doing everything. Thank you, Alan. So we're going? Did you say no? Okay, all right. Lord bless you. Good to see all of you tonight. And what a faithful crowd, man. Coming out in weather like this. Who could ever get a crowd like beautiful as you guys out on a Wednesday night with this kind of beautiful weather? You guys are very godly people. Very spiritual. Don't ever let anybody tell you otherwise. Well, it's great to see all of you. We're kind of in the extended, the appendix of the apocalypse. We're in the extra innings series. We started off in the book of Revelation. This may be the longest series I've ever done on a Wednesday night. I looked at my notes because I number them. This is number 26. So way to go if you've been coming, because we did every chapter in Revelation. And then we went back, as you know, we went back through and have been picking up some of the apocalypses that got built on top of each other. And tonight I want to talk about the book of Daniel, which is, depending on how you look at it, for some people, Daniel is the one who invented the apocalypse. The idea of a symbolic, prophetic work of art that commemorates the end of the age and gives spiritual meaning and encouragement to a traumatized generation. I think there were some before it. I would argue there are bits and pieces in Isaiah. There are probably even parts of Jeremiah, but definitely the throne room scene. And then how can you read the book of Ezekiel and say that's not apocalyptic? It is apocalyptic. It's a message given by angels. It's very visionary. It happens in a dream. It breaks the bounds of time and space. You can time travel and space travel in an apocalypse because it's all in a dream. It's very strange and hard to figure out. If you're reading an apocalyptic passage and you're confused by it, it's because you're reading it correctly. It's not trying to make something complicated easy. I was at a kids camp years ago. This is what a technical nerd I am. All week long, the speaker, she was a female children's pastor, and she kept telling the kids the whole time, because she was teaching out of parables. And she says, you know, parables are trying to make really difficult spiritual concepts easy to understand. And I wanted to raise my hand. I said, no, they're not. I said, that's exactly opposite. In fact, Jesus said, I speak to you in parables so that you won't understand what I'm saying. A parable is a riddle, and so is an apocalypse. So I think if you were ever to completely decode one of the biblical apocalypses, the writers would be very disappointed. I think they would be very bummed. Yes, sir?
I think parables are
used. Parables are used? Tell me.
Because they stick with us.
Yeah. You said, I think parables are used because they stick with us.
They do.
Yeah.
2,000 years later, we're still using them.
We're still using them. Yeah. The word parable means just put two things alongside of each other. But some of the parables Jesus explained, some of the parables the disciples never did understand. And then they said, only many years later did they understand. In the book of Mark, the earliest one of the four Gospels, even though it's second in our Bible, one of my favorite things about that book is that the disciples never get anything right. They never answer any questions right. They never guess right. They never do the right. And I think I can relate to that one. I think more than any of the others. But yes, a parable. So not only that, not only does it stick with you, but the reason Jesus taught in parables, which are riddles, it's kind of a part of the Jewish wisdom literature. It's a part of that Jewish culture. Two things you'll find in Jewish literature. One is irony. So it's very ironic, you know, things that the first shall be last and the last shall be first is very ironic. It's not what you, and so there's a reason that so many of the greatest comedians in American history were Jewish. I don't know if you ever made that connection before, because irony is very much steeped in their culture. It's the way they think and talk. And I said the first thing is irony. The other one is a sense of riddle and puzzlement. And the idea is that if the teacher tells the student something in a riddle, and he has to work at it. He has to think about it, maybe even goes away for a day, comes back in the morning, tells him what. It's made you spend all night thinking about it and pondering about it. And then by the time you finally get that coconut cracked, like you said, it sticks with you. It means something more because you dug at it. So an apocalypse like that, it's not meant to be easily understood on the surface. It's meant to be dug at and studied at and pondered at. It's supposed to make you hunt for the Easter eggs. And so the problem is, when it's written in a different language, and that language is an ancient language, and it's been thousands of years, sometimes we forget where the Easter eggs were buried. And so it can be difficult to understand those things. Fortunately, we have some modern tools. I have a computer Bible, which is absolutely invaluable to me. It would take me 10 to 20 times more study time to get down to some of the discoveries that I make, other than the fact that I have a powerful research thing. And it's really old. It hasn't been made for about 15 years, and I'm still using it because there hasn't been a better one built yet. So, in fact, when Gus retires, one of my thoughts is to get together with him and design a newer version of it. But anyway, so tonight I want to talk about the apocalypse. And just in case you thought I was the one that invented splitting up Israel's history into layers, I did not invent this. Daniel did. And so there's in Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar, who's the king of Babylon, has a dream. And in this dream, he tells all of his wise men, he says, tell me the dream. And they said, well, tell us what it is and we'll interpret it for you. He goes, no, if you were a really wise man, you wouldn't need me to tell it to you. You tell me it. So try that on your psychiatrist one time. Why don't you tell me your dream? Why don't you tell me your dream if you're such a great psychiatrist? You tell me my dream. Anyway, and he tells him the dream, and it's got a head of gold, and it's got arms and shoulders of silver, and then it's got a waist of bronze, and then it's got legs of iron mixed with clay. And he says, you, O king, are that head of gold. So he even tells it to him. And then he walks down through and says that these are all of the layers of the history. And so the one we don't have in Daniel, he doesn't go as far back to the Assyrian Empire. And by the way, I'm just going to state this fact, what my best interpretation of those layers are. I've studied a lot, read a lot of contrary opinions, and so I can never say 100% unless he tells it. But he starts with Babylon and then goes through the Persians, which technically is the Medo-Persians, because the Persians conquered the Medes, and so they were kind of a combined force under Cyrus the Great. And then the Greeks, and then there's a layer right in between here. Then there's the Greek Empire, when the Greek Empire got split up. So this layer right here that Daniel and Enoch are involved with is following that split up of the Greek Empire. And so, and then later on comes the Roman Empire. Can you see this? Man, I was going to do something. I was going to go and make that brighter. But this is a text. Man, I even said it. I get here and then I start talking to Alan. It's all Alan's fault. It's not really. But I start talking and I forget to go and check these pictures. But this is the text of the book of Daniel. One of the most fascinating things about the book of Daniel is it's written in two languages. So the first chapter through about chapter 2, verse 4, halfway through verse 2:4, it switches languages. So up until then, it's written in Hebrew. And the king says, why don't you interpret my king? And they said, okay, here's the king. Then the next phrase is, may the king live forever. And then the wise men start speaking. And from then on, it's all in Aramaic. And then when it gets down to the end of chapter 7, it switches back into Hebrew. Very fascinating. Only book in the Bible that's like that. So why would you do that? Well, and so now why is it like that? One of the theories, you know how much I love to talk about the layers. One of the theories is, well, maybe there were two different books and they put them together. Or maybe it was originally in Hebrew and then they translated it into Aramaic. And but why wouldn't you translate the whole thing? And so it just belies the fact that people in the ancient world, unlike most of us Americans who speak one language, there's several stories in the Bible we just don't get because we can't imagine somebody speaking more than one language. But who would read a book written in two languages? Yes, someone who spoke two languages. So this was written to an audience that could read Hebrew and could read Aramaic. And to prove it, this little scrap here was found at the Dead Sea Scrolls. And the top half of it is Daniel chapter 7. It's written in Aramaic, and then it stops right here, and there's a pause. There's no chapter numbers or verse numbers, and then it starts in Hebrew. And so we found that, and we said, doggone, the oldest copy we have is written in two languages. So don't adjust your television set. It's supposed to be like that. Fascinating, just absolutely fascinating why they would do that. Somewhere around 500 BC, the lingua franca of the empire of Mesopotamia became Aramaic. So it was the ancient people group of Aram, and Aramaic is a Semitic language. It's from the same branch of the tree as Hebrew, and Arabic and Ethiopic are some other Semitic languages. And so it's like a cousin. Closest I can figure, and I only speak Spanish, I don't speak Portuguese, but it would be like going from Portuguese to Spanish. I asked one of my friends one time, how much of it is shared? They said, you really can't understand each other, but about maybe a third, I don't know. There are a lot of loan words. They're very similar, they're cousins. And so, as a matter of fact, you can't even see the difference if this was dark enough or bright enough. People at home watching on their computer maybe can see it. But it's the same exact letters. Before the exile, the Hebrew language was spelt with Phoenician letters, the old blocky Phoenician letters. Then they went into exile and they changed. So whatever scriptures went in to the exile, they were written with the Phoenician letters. We call it Paleo-Hebrew, old Hebrew. And they rewrote everything with the new letters, which were the Aramaic letters. So modern Hebrew is really, the font is an Aramaic font, the language is Hebrew. And that's what they came back with. And so even just the fact that this was still around when Jesus was growing up, he would have gone to synagogue and they would have read the Bible in Hebrew, even though they also had, at the same time had a Greek version that was written already. And they also had Aramaic versions. And so they had other versions that were there, but kind of like traditional Catholics would go and have Mass in Latin, Hebrew was their liturgical language. So probably Jesus, I don't know this for a fact, but probably Jesus would have been able to read or understand Hebrew. But when he left the synagogue and just talked with his mom and dad at their home, they would have spoken Aramaic, which in and of itself was, think of it, a lingering sign that they'd been conquered. They didn't speak their old language. And one of the cool things they did, and I've shown you pictures of it before, but in some of the texts that got rewritten, they used we call it the square font Hebrew. They used the square font, the newer font, to write all of it, except when they get to the proper name of the Lord, Yahweh. They spell those four little letters with the paleo letters, just to talk about what ancient it is. Just a cool little thing. Anyway, I said all that to say Daniel's written in two languages. And so it kind of just puts us in this mode of being at this generation that had two things going on. And the other thing, somebody asked me, I think it was Dwayne asked me a few weeks ago, but Pastor Mike, isn't Daniel in 550 BC? Well, the stories of Daniel are from the 6th century. The stories of Daniel start in the time of Nebuchadnezzar. But because of the topic and because of some of the historical layers that it walks through, the best guess is that this was written, or at least rewritten, in response to the Maccabean revolt. So, and I'll walk through kind of where that comes from. But something curious about Daniel. Questions so far? By the way, you don't have to ever wait for me to stop and say, do you have any questions? Just shoot your hand up. I'll stop talking. And any questions so far? So this is, about 5 or 6 years ago, I did a whole series on the book of Daniel. You can look it up, it's still online. Just go scroll down on your phone and you can see all of it. I go into great detail. I'm going to do it all for you in one night. We're going to get through the entire book. So obviously this is going to be a condensed version. Charles.
Are all of
Say it, wait for it.
the scrolls of Daniel that we have,
Yeah.
are they all written this way, or have
Yeah.
some of them later on been translated into other languages that it's easier for us to understand?
As far as I know, well, they've all been translated into Greek and English and German, all that. So in our Bible, it's all in English, right? So far as I know, the earliest manuscripts and stuff, they are written in 2 different languages. Yeah. And so once again, it's the same letters, but a different language. And by the way, I don't know if we have, what you saw there was a fragment. I don't know if we have an entire old copy of Daniel. And so you remember prior to the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest Old Testament we had was from around 1008. No, that's not true. It was from around, I'm just going to stop because I don't know what the oldest copy of Daniel is. But I know that the oldest manuscripts like Vaticanus are from the 4th century, but the oldest complete with all of the vowels in it are from around 1000 AD. That's what I was going to say. But, so, something curious about Daniel. There's a few little Easter eggs in it that kind of give us a clue that this was written much later. And so the parallel, by the way, almost all of these books, have you noticed this? Zechariah and Nehemiah, those are probably closest written during the time that they were speaking because they're unaware of anything that's going to happen after that. But one of the little Easter eggs, if you've ever noticed it, is at the beginning of each one of the chapters, or most of the chapters, it says in the year, like this says, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and the visions of his head and on his bed. And then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matter. So this is how chapter 7 starts. It's how chapter 1 starts, chapter 2. In such a year, the 3rd year of Nebuchadnezzar. And then it talks about King Belshazzar, king of Babylon. And then it talks about King Darius the Mede. And then it talks about Cyrus the Persian. All right. 2 of those are historical people. And one of them, and the other 2, the names are familiar, but they're out of order and out of place. So here's my little chart. Here's Daniel's rulers. The first one is Nebuchadnezzar II, really very important person in Babylon's history. He took over in about 605, which was one of his first times that he raided Israel and took several exiles. This isn't the time that he destroyed the temple, but in the story of Daniel, Daniel was one of that first wave that got taken into exile. So the story begins in about 605. 586, of course, is the year that Jerusalem was finally destroyed and the last wave of exile was just taken in. The second guy he talks about is Belshazzar, which is who was a real person. Belshazzar was a very historical person, but he was never king. He was the son of Nabonidus, who was the third, it's like the two down from Nebuchadnezzar, 2 or 3 down. And Nabonidus was in the 556 or so, he took over. But there was a period of time for about 10 years that he took off. He went into self-imposed exile, and nobody knows why. And during that time, Belshazzar, who was you could call him the crown prince, he took over. He was never the king. He never had full duties or full titles, but he basically ruled. So most of us just say, well, we're just going to cut him slack. They call him King Belshazzar. We're just going to say he was the guy that, he was king temporary. He was the ruler, okay? So it's not that big of a deal. So you can try to smooth that out If you're a maximalist, which everything in the Bible has to be literal and there's no such thing as prophetic fiction. If you're more like me, that I really don't care one way or another, for me, that's a little bit of a fingerprint that we're not supposed to be paying too much attention to this being a historical story. It's like when I go to watch Braveheart. You know, there's some things in that. What's his name? William of Wallace. That's not it, is it? William Wallace was a real person. Yeah, he was a real person. But he didn't wear blue face paint or wear a kilt. So William Wallace was from the 12th century, and he did fight against the British. But that woad, that blue woad he wears on his face, that was from the 5th century. They stopped using that a long time ago. And the kilts were from the 18th century. And so there's a lot of anachronisms. It doesn't mean that William Wallace is it's not entirely a false story. There's a lot of other things too. He has kind of a little affair with that French princess who would have been a baby at the time he was alive, so that's not possible. And a bunch of the other names but they put it together. It doesn't make it a bad story. It's still a great movie. And do you really care? And if you want to know the historical things, you go read a history book. I don't go to the movie theater to get my history lessons, right? In fact, that's one of the cool things is it makes me want to learn more about the actual history. Isn't that what it does to you? And so what we don't realize is it's some people will say, if everything in the Bible isn't exactly, like if it says it was written this, then it must be written at that point, then you should just throw out the whole thing. I don't see the logic in that. It is entirely possible for, like, Shakespeare wrote a play about Julius Caesar. Shakespeare did not live when Julius Caesar was alive, right? But he's writing a play based on Julius Caesar. And so there were court tales around the story of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was a real guy. Belshazzar was a good guy. But what Daniel is doing is he's prophesying. And he's using the context of Babylon to tell us a story, right? And so I don't get too worked up about those things. The most interesting guy is Darius the Mede. His long title is Darius the king of the Chaldean dynasty, who was the descendant of the Medes. None of that makes sense. There was a guy named Darius the Great, who was like the grandson of Cyrus, which is many, many years later, like a century later. But the Medes, we know the last Mede was Astyages, and he was conquered by Cyrus the Great, who was Persian, and so he wasn't descended from that. And it's kind of like saying the next king in the story his name is George Washington, the son of Abraham Lincoln, the Frenchman. You know what I mean? It's like, wait, you just got all of those names out of order, and then you got the wrong nationality for it. And so people will go somersaults trying to iron it all out. No, it's got to be right. I don't. I just say, oh, so I'm not supposed to. The most important part of this story is not the title of the guy. It's listen to what the story is talking about. Does that all make sense? Most modern scholars think that Darius the Mede was just inserted, but maybe they were talking about Astyages. I don't know. And then the last guy is very real, Cyrus the Great. He was the Persian emperor who conquered Babylon. First he conquered Media, and then he returned the exiles in 539. And so these are the people that are in the backdrop of it. Questions about any of those? No. So Darius the Mede. Darius was a Persian, and he was from many, many years later, but I don't know. So this just kind of tells me that whoever wrote this story was not only distant from Babylon, but it had been quite a few years, and that most of the people reading it just said, Darius, yeah, I heard of him. That's it. Like if they read the guy's name is Muhammad, you said, you remember when Muhammad lived? Right, that's how Darius was. Daniel spoke and said, I saw a vision by night, and behold, 4 winds of the sky broke forth on the great sea, and 4 great animals came up from the sea, diverse from one another, or 4 great beasts. So does any of this sound familiar? Yeah, this is all in the book of Revelation. You remember reading it? So they come up, this beast comes up out of the sea. You see the four great winds. And so in Revelation, there's four angels holding back the four winds. So this is all apocalyptic language. This is the palette that he's painting this picture for him. And he's going to tell us a story about something. He said, and here's the four beasts. He said, the first was like a lion, and he had eagle's wings. And I saw until the wings were plucked. And it was lifted up from off the earth or land and made to stand on 2 feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. What does all of that mean? I don't know. I don't know what most of it means. I just know this, that if we're following the pattern of the statues, Daniel told us, you, O king, are the golden head. And so he's going to start with the layers down. Each one of these beasts is another king or another kingdom. And so the first one is Babylon. So here's the map. So the Babylonian Empire stretched all throughout Mesopotamia up here. It did not go down onto the Sinai Peninsula or conquer Egypt. But here's Babylon under King Nebuchadnezzar. You, O king, are the golden head. And he pictures him as a lion with wings. What I think is cool, because I don't have a symbolic connection to the other four, but this one, in fact, we have in a famous museum, the gates of Nineveh. And what do you see? Well, it's like a horse with lion's paws and a human head and wings. So this whole idea of these creatures with different body parts and all this stuff, this is very Babylonian, if you will. This is very Babylonian and then Persian. This is very much influenced. The mythology and the symbology is very much taken from the Babylonian world. And so that's the first one. Then he says, behold another animal, a second, like a bear, or another beast, if you will. I just say that because in the book of Revelation, he has the two beasts, and that's written in Greek. So the word, I probably would have said beasts, but it's like a bear, and it was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. And they said thus to it, arise, devour much flesh. Like I said, any puzzle, I don't understand 90% of what this is talking about. He probably had a meaning to every one. But the kingdom that conquered the Babylonians was the Medo-Persian kingdom. Specifically, so the Babylonians, it was the Chaldean dynasty, Neo-Babylonian Empire, and this is the Medo-Persian, and so this is the Achaemenid, where the stories that we've just been in from Ezra and Nehemiah and Zechariah was under the Persians. And so this is the chest of silver, and this is the bear. What are the 3 ribs in its mouth? We can just guess. My best guess is something like the Medes and the Lydians and the Egyptians, or one of the other minor kingdoms that got wrapped up when it was taken over. But we'll have to ask Daniel when we get there what that means. After this, I saw, and behold, another like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. And the animal also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. And so Revelation 3:7 uses that phraseology a lot with the beasts, and it was given to him authority. He was given power to make war against the saints, and he was given a boastful mouth. So phrases like this in the apocalypse is reminding us that even though these kings are coming and attacking, that the God of Israel is sovereign over all of them. He's the master. Even the whole statue of walking down through all of the 4 great empires said, it seems like those empires are in charge, but according to this story that I'm telling you today, is God's in charge of all of them. Those empires are going to come and go, but there's a King of Kings and a Lord of Lords. And so here's the leopard. So my best guess is the leopard is Alexander the Great, who came in around 330 and conquered the whole known world like in a couple of years, and then just a couple of years after that died as a young man. And he was swift. My only guess, why is he a leopard? Well, compared to the big old Medo-Persian Empire, He was the inventor of the blitzkrieg. The speed with which he took over the world is just staggering. And he is why the New Testament's written in Greek. And so they spread the Greek language and culture everywhere. That was a big part of the conflict later in the first century with Jesus. So some of those Jews wanted to become more Jewish, and some, like the Herods, wanted to become more Greek. They called them Hellenized, because that was named after one of their gods. Hellenism was the word for making Greek culture and language popular. And why does he have 4 heads and 4 wings? This one actually, for me, is low-hanging fruit. It's because Alexander had 4 generals. And when he died, he had no next of kin. And so his kingdom was split up between his 4 generals. We call that the period of the Diadochi. And so 2 of those kingdoms, I'll point it out on the next slide. One of them down in Egypt went to his general named Ptolemy, who established the Ptolemaic dynasty. And the other, this whole area, went to his general named Seleucus, which turned into the Seleucid Empire. And so the other 2 generals aren't on this map, so I'm not even going to pay attention to them. But there are 2 other ones. And so it says, and after this, I saw in the night visions that I mentioned, by the way. Did you notice the very first thing he says is, everything that happens in this vision happens in a dream? It's all in a dream. You can't lose sight of that. When we start getting too literal or too concrete about our interpretations, this is a dream. So not only are dreams hard to understand, sometimes dreams are open to interpretation. So I would never fight over. I have a pastor friend of mine who has a wrong theory about this chapter, and I don't debate it with him. He's just wrong. Because he's reading his commentaries and I'm reading mine. But he says, after this I saw night visions, and behold, the 4th animal, awesome and powerful and strong exceedingly. And it had a great iron teeth, and it devoured and broke in pieces. And it stamped the residue with its feet, and it was diverse from all the animals, or different, that were before it. And it had 10 horns. Remember the 10 horns from Revelation? The dragon had 10 horns. 10 horns or 7? I forget how many heads. And anyway, the multiple horns. The 10 horns is from the book of Revelation, is from Daniel. He's the one that invented this picture of a creature with 10 horns. And we find out later that the 10 horns represent individual kings or kingdoms. And so this is a kingdom. So on my chart, it's the Seleucid Empire and all of its subsequent kings, most of whom were pretty decent because Jerusalem was right there in the middle of their empire, and it was one of their prominent cities. So it was just a client of the Seleucid Empire. For most of the history, it was peaceful. They were just an obedient, subservient to the Seleucids. And then, so here's the Diadochi. So here's Ptolemaic Egypt, and here's the Seleucid Empire, which to me is the legs of iron mixed with clay. Now, I will say this, because if you go on, if I had an argument with ChatGPT today. I actually tried to argue with it. It is so dumb, it never changes its mind. Sometimes you'll catch it and say, oh, good catch. But I said, it's not, it's the Seleucid Empire. It's not, because many modern commentaries, probably if you had a Bible with footnotes in it, it would say that the legs of iron mixed with clay is Rome. All right, which makes sense if you are in the 1st century. So what happened is, but my proposition is that this was written in the wake of the Maccabean revolt, so it's like 160. Rome is not a world power. So you can see, yeah, but it was predicting Rome. And so then here's my question is, my messed up revelation for a lot of you, what if nobody knows the future? Doesn't mean we can't prophesy, or we can't predict, or we can't say, and then someday. We can't prophesy values and ideal outcomes. But what if nobody knows the future? And so when I was first starting off, a lot of my commentaries were more, I guess, conservative, evangelical. And I think I even preached the first time through Daniel. You know, there are some dumb modern scholars that say that Daniel was written later because nobody could ever predict the future. And of course, God can predict the future, right? That was my approach. I used to argue things like that, and now more, I just want to know what it's actually talking about. So I don't have an agenda. But I will say, by the time of the first century, this story, what they reread it, the legs of iron and clay were definitely recast as Rome. So 100 years goes by, and now there's a new conflict. And definitely, if you were asked the writer of Revelation, that next layer is Rome. But we're in our time machine tonight. I forgot to tell you to climb in my time machine when I started. But we're back in 160 BC, right? This is not talking about Rome, because then it would have nothing to do with you and me. It was talking about the conflict that just happened. The trauma they just came through was the trauma under the Seleucids. And I love this picture. I didn't come up with any of these, but look at that beast. You're not supposed to draw pictures of all of these things. And so if you know the end of chapter 2 and chapter 7 of Daniel are a inclusio. They're the beginning and the end of this section. And the stories that are in between kind of are like a Russian nesting doll. And so the statue dream in Daniel 2 is the parallel of these visions of the four beasts. And so that's why I'm putting them both on the map and putting them together like this. And what happens at the end of this, not in this one, but back in the statue dream, he says, then at the end of it, this giant rock hewed out of a mountain, not by human hands, comes and he smashes the statue. I think I have a slide later on. He says, and then I considered the hordes, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things or boastful things. And so this is a phrase that talks about the beast out of the sea. It speaks blasphemies against God, speaks boastfully. And so the beast out of the sea is kind of a redo of this little horn. So in this passage, he calls him the little horn. So he's the little horn because he's part of that empire, the Seleucid Empire with the 10 horns. And then there's one little horn. So he's another layer, but he's actually a part of that previous kingdom because he's a Seleucid king. Who is the little horn? His name is Antiochus Epiphanes IV. Antiochus. He ruled from up here in Antioch. And so that's why those kings, their regnal name was Antiochus, and he was the 4th. And so remember, we were back in, the 5th or 6th century? Now we're all the way up to 168. He came down and persecuted Jerusalem. And I'll talk a little bit more about what he did, but Josephus tells us all this story, and the books of 1st and 2nd Maccabee, which are in the Catholic Bible, tells us the history of the Maccabean revolt against him. He was the prototype, if you will, of the Antichrist. And so his whole thing, he's resurrected then again in the book of Revelation, and when the New Testament talks about the Antichrist is to come, he was the original. And so he was the Seleucid emperor, and he kept trying to take over Egypt from the Ptolemies. And there are several, in the other chapters of Daniel, it talks about in detail the wars that went back and forth between the Ptolemies and the Seleucids and their intermarriages, and one emperor raising the other one's sons, and just generations of conflict and intrigue. And it came down to a point in time, and I'll summarize the story, that he came down for the second time and tried to take over Memphis in Egypt. And the Roman Senate sent down his college buddy. His name escapes me. His buddy from Rome. They grew up together. And he says, I've got a message. He goes, the Roman Senate says you cannot take over Egypt. So Rome wasn't the empire yet, but Rome had a lot of sway. It was up and coming. It was a force to be reckoned with. And he says, if you try to take Memphis, Rome's going to go to war against you. And he says, all right, give me the night to sleep on it. And he says, nope. He took a stick and he drew it around Antiochus. And he says, don't step out of that circle till I have your answer. And so Josephus says he stepped out and he says, fine, I won't take it. And he went back and he took his army. I forgot to mention, on his way down to Egypt, the Jews had appointed their own high priest, who was kind of like the governor of Jerusalem. And while he was gone on his little mission, they replaced him. They took a bribe for another guy and they put another guy in place. And so Antiochus was fuming. If you can imagine, you don't even have to be a crazy person to understand. If you're a general and a leader and you got told no like that, you're fuming. He gets back to Jerusalem, realized that they put their own high priest in, and that city was supposed to be his city. He's saying, I can't even get respect in my own city. And according to Josephus, he just blew his stack. He went crazy. I don't know if he went actually insane, but he went really ballistic. And his goal became to stomp out Judaism once and for all, to make Jerusalem a Greek's polis, a Greek city, and get rid of this stupid religion. And he went crazy. He did several things. He went in and looted all of the treasures and all of the sacred articles from out of the temple. And then he set up in the Holy of Holies an altar, a statue to Zeus. And then out on the golden altar where they would sacrifice the cattle and stuff and bring them into the Holy of Holies, he would sacrifice pigs because he knew that was an unclean animal to the Jews. And, so this isn't just accidental. This is what you do when you're a tyrant and you're trying to, absolutely destroy the heart and mind of these people. And not only that, but then he would bring them up onto the Temple Mount and force them to eat it, which was an unclean thing. And then he forbade circumcision for the ladies to circumcise their sons, which is a very big deal in their culture to keep their culture alive, and did terrible things to the babies and to the mothers, and found every copy of the Hebrew scriptures that he could get his hands on and burned it. Basically tried to stamp out Judaism, right? So he was a really bad dude in the story of the Israelites, right? So when is an apocalypse written? It's written in the wake of a trauma. So he was, for their generation, he was the Hitler of their generation. And for the first time in all of these years, think about it, even in the time of Hezekiah and Josiah and all of those godly kings in the Old Testament, they were always underneath another emperor. They were always a subset of another empire. And for the first time, there was a family, a family of priests that lived out in the country. The father's name was Mattathias, and him and his 4 sons, or I forget, maybe 4 or 5, they formed a militia. It was like the original Red Dawn. They were the Wolverines up in the hills. Anybody remember Red Dawn? Greatest movies of all time from the 80s. Wolverines. Anyway, they became the Maccabees. They fought. And so they were priests that fought. And they didn't have a last name, but the oldest son was named as Judas, or Judah. And they gave him the nickname Judah Maccabeus, which means Judah the Hammer. So they all collectively became known as the Maccabees, but that was just the nickname of one of them. They all had different nicknames, but one of them's name was John, one was Simon, and that's why in the New Testament, there's so many of the disciples and the people in the first century are named John, Simon, and Judah, because the mothers named them after the Maccabee brothers, the heroes. They fought back. It took several years. Several of them died. You can read the stories in 1st and 2nd Maccabees. That's a public record. And eventually, they fought back the Seleucids, and they left them alone. And they went and rededicated the temple, and they relit the menorah, which is the origin of Hanukkah. Around Christmas time, it's the lighting of the menorah. And for the first time, really, in the entire history of the Bible, the kingdom of Israel was its own autonomous kingdom. I know that seems strange to say. You say, what about David? Even during the time of David and Solomon, there was always Egypt, there was always Mesopotamia, there was always the Assyrians. And so the story of the book of Daniel, if you will, now that I've told you, like Paul Harvey says, the rest of the story, think back through the court tales in Daniel. And so one of the first things they did is when they brought Daniel up into the court of King Nebuchadnezzar. So it's talking about the Maccabean revolt and the Seleucids, but he's going back and putting it in a Babylonian context. You ever see remember MASH, in the 70s? You remember the TV show MASH? What war was that based on? Korea, right? Well, the story is Korea, but when the movie was made, it was a protest against Vietnam. Robert Altman made it. And he actually wanted it to be about Vietnam, and the studios wouldn't let him. So he made it about Korea. So even though it's in Korea, and the TV show went for like 15 years, and Korean War only lasted for 3, but it was a movie and a TV show that was set in Korea, but it really was about the modern context of Vietnam. Does that make sense? It's one of the best illustrations I could make is that the story of Daniel is set in old Babylon with the old kings that have been long gone now. But it's about the conflict with the Seleucids and Antiochus. And so all of those kings, Nebuchadnezzar is a stand-in in this story for Antiochus. So one of the first challenges is they bring these Daniel and his buddies in, and they ask him to eat the king's meat. And he refuses to eat it, even though there's nothing in the context that said there was anything wrong with eating the meat. That story is, don't be afraid to say no when they tell you to eat some of those unclean pigs from off of the thing. Another one of the stories is when Nebuchadnezzar wheels out this giant statue. Now, there was historically statues like the Colossus of Rhodes and different ones, but just like there was this statue in the Holy of Holies to Zeus, and he says, don't bow down to him because, even if they throw you in the furnace, God's going to protect you. Later on, I think it was Darius is now in charge, who is in Media, so kind of doesn't make sense in time or space. Darius the Mede, who was a kind of a combination of a lot of different characters. Daniel is praying 3 times a day. Just what you do in exile. And he gets thrown into the lion's den, but God protects him, because some of Darius's advisors get him to throw him in. And so when Antiochus cut off the morning and the evening sacrifices, he's saying, listen, even though an evil tyrant tells you that you can't make the sacrifice and you can't pray, you can pray in your home, can't you? So don't give up the faith. So all these stories are retold to give inspiration, right? To help these young guys that are fighting in the Maccabean Wars. And at some point it says, and then this stone comes, hewn out of the mountain, and it comes and it smashes and it destroys all of those other emperors, and they just blow away in the wind. And so this is kind of, it kind of becomes a story of the establishment of this new kingdom. And for the very first time, it's not big, and it's still kind of surrounded by the Seleucids, but for the next 100 years or so, Israel is a self-governing kingdom. And the dynasty that gets established, Jonathan Aphus is the family member that's the first king. Down through, you can watch, sometimes in that 100 years, they have a king and a high priest. Sometimes the king is the high priest. Sometimes the priest is the king. And they kind of share roles, and just depends on the layer. But you can read the history books on the whole history of that, which eventually becomes, they call it the Hasmonean dynasty. And it lasts until about 63 BC when finally they have a civil war because they can't agree about who the new high priest or king is going to be. And so they invite the Romans in to settle it. And the Romans were like the 300-pound gorilla that comes to dinner and never leaves. So Pompey the Great comes down and takes over Israel. A few years later, in about 37 BC, they find and they raise up a guy named Herod the Great. Never trust a guy whose middle name is the. And he marries one of the last princesses from the Hasmonean line, as if to make himself the rightful heir of the Maccabean throne. And ironically, eventually that Hasmonean kingdom becomes the Herods that are around in the book of Revelation, who actually become the whore of Babylon. But we're not there yet. We're in our time machine. We're clear back when it's happily ever after, right? So the Hasmonean kingdoms are the good guys at this point. Questions about that whole long? The history of the Maccabean revolt in 5 minutes. He says, and I saw until thrones were placed. Now he has a vision. So we have the 4 beasts that came up, and the one little horn that comes up and is ornery. And now he has a little throne room vision. He says, I saw until thrones were placed, and one who was ancient of days sat. His clothing was as white as snow, and the hair of his head are like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, and the wheels of it of burning fire. So now you remember, he's kind of picking up on themes that were in all these other pockets. So you had Isaiah, who was in the throne room. I saw the Lord seated on his throne. So we have Isaiah 6, and now we have mixed in with Zechariah prophesying about Joshua, the high priest, who is in the Holy of Holies. And now we have a little bit of Ezekiel with the chariots, with the wheels and the flames. And we have a new character called the Ancient of Days. I would ask you, who is the Ancient of Days? But I'm not going to, because it's a trick question and I don't want you to get the answer wrong. So offhand, I just don't want to. You want to guess?
Jesus.
Okay. You know, Jesus is a great answer in any Sunday school question. And actually, brother, you're mostly right. It is adjacent. Okay. So the Ancient of Days. Just put a pin in that, would you? Ancient of Days. And literally, there's nothing in the Hebrew language that gives you any more information. The Ancient of Days, that's literally what the name means. And then it says, and a fiery stream issued and came forth from before him, and thousands of thousands ministered to him, and 10,000 times 10,000. So the book of Revelation uses that language, right? In the throne room. By the way, this is the throne room that gives place to the beginning of the book of Revelation, starts in a throne room. And so this is, that was a retelling or reusing some of those motifs from the book of Daniel. And they stood before him, and the judgment was set, and the books were opened. So that's language like from the great white throne at the end of book of Revelation, right? The great white throne comes, and then the books are open. So this is all a scene of in the throne room of a day of judgment and accountability. So the fire is kind of a language of the judgment of the Lord. He's coming to set things right. And he says, and I saw at that time, because of the voice of the great words which the horn spoke. Remember, the horn is the bad guy. That's Antiochus. And I saw even until the animal was slain and its body was destroyed, and it was given to be burned with fire. So at the end of the book of Revelation, you remember both the beast and the false prophet and the dragon. Eventually, where do they end up? They all end up in the fire, right? So that's all language that's from the book of Daniel. He's talking about a great judgment. And the rest of the animals, their dominion was taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. He continues on. He says, and I saw in the night visions, and behold, there came with the clouds of the sky one like a son of man. Now, who's the son of man? I thought you just said the Ancient of Days was the Son of Man.
He's both.
He's both? All right, he can't be both, and I'll show you why. But a second, just put a pin in it. Don't make him about Jesus, because the Son of Man is a title that Jesus uses about himself a lot. It's kind of confusing. In the Old Testament, in Aramaic, it's Bar Enosh. In Hebrew, it's Ben Adam. But the Bar Enosh is a title that was used in apocalyptic circles. And so just put a pin in that one, all right? Let's just put these on our cork board for a second, right? So we've got two people. We've got the little horn, and we've got the Ancient of Days. I wonder who that is. And then we've got the Son of Man. And these are characters in this apocalypse. Remember, this all happens in a dream, so don't get too... Charlie, do you have a question? Trust me when I say, it's a little bit confusing. He actually goes through and explains all of these.
I was trying to figure out if the Ancient of Days was either God or Satan.
It's not Satan. Satan isn't in this story.
Okay.
Yeah. Not in this. In chapter 7, Satan does not show up.
Ancient
So ancient of days, God, sure, okay. That makes sense because God is very ancient. We're just going to put a cork on it, right? If this is the only verse, it would be hard to understand. Just put them on the corkboard for a second. Or flannel graphs. Remember flannel graphs, Donna? You know, with the little fuzzy things, guys in the back. I used to love those guys. Although, I kid you not, they used the same bearded guy with the robe. He could have been Peter or Abraham. They just changed his name every Sunday. Because how do we know what he looks like, right? Okay, anyway. I know, because Moses always looks like Charlton Heston for some reason. Okay, so the clouds in the sky. Jesus uses this phrase, the Son of Man comes in the clouds of the sky. This is very apocalyptic language. And so there are several parables. Several times Jesus talks about someday the Son of Man will return on the clouds. And that's apocalyptic language for the day of judgment is coming. And he came even to the Ancient of Days. So you see me with me, brother? So the Son of Man comes to the Ancient of Days. So they both can't be the same people. Follow me on that? So now they're still on the corkboard. I'll tell you who they are in just a second. And they brought him near before him. And so here's the picture, right? The Ancient of Days comes with this white hair because he's super old. And he sits on his throne. And all of the angels are around him. He sits down on authority. And the Son of Man comes up before him. So the Son of Man comes into his presence. Actually, okay, I'm not going to skip the book of Revelation. I'm just going to picture that scene right there. Who in the Old Testament sits on the throne? Just don't answer quite so yet. All right. Who sits on the throne? Who sits on the authority in Israel? He says, and there was given him dominion and glory. Given whom? Given to the Son of Man. So the Ancient of Days hands off the dominion the Ancient of Days hands off the dominion to the Son of Man. Okay? And the kingdom that all peoples of and glory and a kingdom that all the peoples, nations, language should serve him. Some translations say worship him, and that's a mistake. It's because they've gone to the end, just like you are, and they say, which one of these is Jesus, right? Remember, this is 160 BC. No one had ever heard the name Jesus. Right? We don't have that story yet. This is still very Old Testament. And it says, serve him. Yes, there is Yahweh. But serve him, some say worship him because they're going ahead to make it about Jesus. But the word worship and serve is kind of the same one. I think serve is better. I'll explain why. And his dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. And so pump the brakes. I know you're going to say, of course that's about Jesus. Only Jesus can have an eternal kingdom. All right. This is going to be about Jesus by the New Testament. Eventually it is. But at this point, it's not yet. And so the word everlasting, olam in Hebrew, the idea of time without end does not exist in Hebrew thought. So everlasting just means it's not going to be over right away. It's going to last for a long time. It's going to last for the rest of the age. Okay. But all of those words, all of those verses in Psalms that talk about ever and ever and always and all of those, when those get retranslated into Greek, in the Greek language, they have eternity without end. And so I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever, right? In Greek, it's forever means just like for all of eternity. In the Hebrew language, it's I'll dwell in the house of the Lord until I die. It's kind of forever. Okay. All right, let's keep going. Trust me, I'm not just making this up. I've gone to the end of it and then gone back and then everlasting dimension which shall not pass away. And for me, Daniel, my spirit was grieved in the midst of my body, and the visions in my head troubled me. Several places in the book of Revelation, remember he gives him the scroll and he said, it's going to be sweet in your mouth but sour in your stomach. He said, it's going to have two things, right? This is a good thing, right? The kingdom being handed off to the Son of Man. Who is the Son of Man? And who is the Ancient of Days? It's a little bit bittersweet because there's going to be a lot of people die in this conflict as well. So it's not just a hurrah. And I came near to one of those who stood by, that was an angel, and I asked him the truth concerning all this. So he told me, and he made me know the interpretation of the things. In verse 17, he says, the great animals which are four kings. We already got that one, didn't we? They're four kings. And we know because we went back to the statue, although people argue about who the fourth one is. Is it Rome or Seleucid? All right, it only makes sense if it's 160 BC that it's the Seleucids are the final layer. The great animals are four, which shall arise out of the land, or you can say out of the earth. But so at first the beasts came out of the sea, and now those same beasts come out of the land. In the book of Revelation, we have a beast out of the sea and a beast out of the land. But he's resurrecting those motifs. But the saints of the Most High, all right, I just answered. The saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. The saints of the Most High. Saints in Hebrew is holy ones, the holy people. The holy people of the Most High. And so when we're really quick to be Trinitarian, remember they didn't know the word Trinity. They didn't know Father, Son, and Holy Spirit like we have that in 160 BC. And so, but if you were to try to figure out where does the Trinity fit in, who is the Most High? That's God the Father, or God, the Most High God, Elyon. The people of the Most High are us, is the kingdom of Israel. You could say the Maccabees, all the people, all the Israelites that fought, all right? And so who receives the kingdom? It says the saints of the Most High receive the kingdom. But a couple verses ago it said the one who received the kingdom was who? The Son of Man, right? So now the Son of Man is the saints of the Most High. Those are the same thing. So in the prophetic language, oftentimes in Isaiah, he will say things like, Israel, my servant. It is personified as a person. This is what makes this kind of confusing because Son of Man sounds like it's one person. And now he's saying the same thing. First, the Son of Man receives the kingdom, but now he's saying that the people of the Most High receive the kingdom.
And we are the body of Christ.
What's that?
And we are the body of Christ.
Yes, eventually we will be in that role.
Yes.
So that's the next layer, right? So I'm only on the second layer. I'm like, what did it mean in the Old Testament? Now, what did it mean in Daniel? This is a transition. Daniel is kind of prophetically, it's a transition between the Old and New Testament. And eventually it's going to be something else. And so, yeah, so the nation of Israel becomes the Son of Man, AKA the people of the Most High. And eventually this is going to be about the church. It's going to be about us, right? And so we are going to receive that kingdom. So here's the translation. The four beasts are four kingdoms. The little horn is Antiochus Epiphanes the fourth. Yeah? The Most High is the God of heaven. The Ancient of Days, wait for it, is David. And the Son of Man is the saints or the kingdom of Israel. How is it David? So you remember last week we were talking about Zerubbabel, who was one of the last descendants in the line of David. So go all the way back to 1000 BC. That there will always be somebody from your line that will reign on the throne. So David was the King Arthur of Israel. He was the spiritual king. Every king that sat on the throne of Judah sat on David's throne. It was David's king. It was David's throne. So it's God's kingdom, but David was his anointed king, was his anointed one, just where we get the word Messiah and Christ. So that whole messianic idea is David. The Ancient of Days, this is Mike Cook's humble opinion, and you won't find a lot of other Bible teachers or pastors that have this theory. This is the one that my pastor friend disagrees with, but it's only because not many people are crazy enough to spend this much time thinking about it. The Ancient of Days, so there's a prophecy of Micah. He says, "Oh, but you, Bethlehem Ephratah, though you're small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come one who will be the ruler on the throne of Judah, whose origin are from ancient times." All right, so when the Bible, the angel announces to Mary, he goes, that you're gonna have a son and you're gonna give him the name Jesus, and he will sit on the throne of his father David. Right? So Jesus, that's another way of saying Jesus is gonna be the Messiah, the anointed one. When Jesus comes back in the book of Revelation, at the first part of the book of Revelation, and Jesus is revealed, he comes out and he's got white hair. and he's glowing with fire. And a lot of the same language about the Ancient of Days is used of him. I know it's really tempting. On a first class, I want to say Ancient of Days sounds like God the Father, and then the Son of Man, because Jesus used that about himself. That's obviously Jesus. It's really easy, but those phrases took on new meanings in the New Testament. In this story, the Ancient of Days, it's almost a vision of David. Why does he have white hair? Because he's 1,000 years old by now. Ancient David comes, sits on the throne of David, and hands off the keys of the kingdom to the new Hasmonean kingdom, to the brand new kingdom of Israel. And so the Son of Man is the people of the Most High, and he gives them the kingdom. And so that's what this prophecy in Daniel is written to, and that's who it's written for. So, all right. And the Son of Man is the saints. Man. All I can tell you is I've been trying on this theory for probably about 10 or 12 years, and I haven't run into anything that's dissuaded it from me. And trust me, I changed my theory overnight. And why this is a cool prophecy for you and me is just like you said, because now the Ancient of Days is Jesus on his throne. In the book of Revelation, Jesus comes back, sits down on his throne, and hands off the keys of the kingdom to the church. And God Most High is still on his throne. Yeah. And so all three of these, it's just beautiful. But understanding what that means for us, first we have to understand what did it mean to these people that lived in this time. And I saw, and I'll just read it again because there's a few more verses that just kind of seem to double down on my interpretation I just said, right? So read the rest of it. And I saw the same horn made war with the saints. So that's Antiochus making war against the Israelites, right? And prevailed against them until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High. And the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. And so David comes. It was almost like we threw the challenge flag and it went back to Secaucus so that the refs could look at the footage and tell us, whether it was a foul or not. Right? David shows up as the referee, sits down on his throne, and he looks between Antiochus and the people of Israel, and he says, kingdom goes to you guys. So it wasn't just, this is a spiritual explanation of, well, they fought a war and they beat him back, right? They're saying, no, this is David handing off the keys to us. And even though not since Zerubbabel in, 450 BC, or whenever Zerubbabel was in the 5th century BC, it had been 300 or 400 years since there was a king who sat on David's throne. And so they're resurrecting that idea. He says, and he shall speak words against the Most High, and he shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and he shall think to change the times and the law, and they shall be given into his hand until times and times and half a time. And so times and time and half a time, a lot of people interpret that in the book of Revelation over and over. It mentions the 42 months. And so Antiochus came in and he sacrificed pig on the altar. He set up a statue of Zeus in the temple. He forbid them from making the daily sacrifice. That's changed the times and the laws. And he forbid them from circumcising their infants. He burned the copies of the scriptures. And it lasted from about 167 to 164. Till finally the Maccabees defeated him in about 160. And so shortly after that time is when the book of Daniel was written. And all of these great stories, partly in Hebrew and partly in Aramaic. And think about how amazing this is. It was a conflict that was about 3 years long. And now we have in about 67 AD when the Romans come, and that's what Revelation was written about. And the writer of the book of Revelation resurrected a lot of this language from Daniel to talk about the conflict that they had, which also, the siege of Jerusalem and its final destruction also lasted for about 3 years. And so you have that same motif that comes back around again. And it says, but the judgment shall be set, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and destroy it to the end. So they take away his dominion. That's the Maccabees. But even though they fought back, he says, really, it was the Lord that was on our side. And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole sky shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. The saints of the Most High is the Son of Man. Now, what's interesting is that phrase, the Son of Man, even though it's a personification for the whole nation, when Jesus comes along, he embodies the whole thing. Just as he does with the suffering servant of Isaiah 53. He was wounded for our transgressions. He was pierced for our iniquities. That was about that generation, but then it becomes about Jesus. He wraps it all up. Here is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts much troubled me, and my face changed in me, but I kept the matter in my heart. And that's the last verse in this section that is written in Aramaic. And the beginning of chapter 8 starts in Hebrew. Just really fascinating book. Questions about any of this? You find a pastor buddy or a professor buddy, you go tell them that the Ancient of Days is David. They will argue with you. But I'm telling you, it's the right answer. I don't know. Anybody else have another theory? Not now, you don't. You know what? There's another telltale. I've even shown a video about this when I get to this point. J.R. Tolkien, who wrote The Lord of the Rings, he knew about this whole parallel. And you remember Gandalf goes away, he's Gandalf the Grey, and when he comes back, he's Gandalf the White. And it's kind of like this. David comes back with white hair. Jesus goes away, young man comes back with white hair in the book of Revelation, sits down on the throne. And so the answer is this. Now, Jesus is now on his throne forever and ever, and he's given us the kingdom. And he's given us the keys, and he says, go out and do my work. Yeah, brother.
I was just saying that, it's interesting to me how many times
People have tried to destroy the Word of God
Yeah,
and how God has preserved it
yeah,
over and over and over again.
yeah, he has. Amen. Yeah, and this is a victory. I wish I could say this is the last bad thing that the Israelites ever went through. But we know the history book. But at this moment in time, the happily ever after is. The kingdom is established. And forever and ever, well, all of these people died with it still intact. So, but in Jewish history, things go in cycles. They go in ages. So this is the end of the Seleucid age and the beginning of the Kingdom of Israel age. And then somebody wrote down, whenever they had a transition like that, somebody wrote down and wrote an apocalypse about it. And we call it Daniel. Where do you want to go from here? Kind of out of books, other than just kind of go in other. Are there any other books that you are curious about, or that have always puzzled you, or that
Wherever you lead, we'll follow.
wherever you lead, I'll follow? That puts all the pressure on me to figure out something. I don't have anything in order. All right. Is it just potpourri for the next? Because we go, the 20th is the last week of May. So how many more weeks is that? Today's the 6th? 2 more? All right, they'll just be wild cards then. All right, whatever. They won't be in order because the book of Daniel kind of ends it. We could do the book of Enoch, but it's not in the Bible. I don't want to get convicted of being a heretic. You want to hear something from Enoch?
Yes.
You do?
Yes.
That would be fun. Okay.
I bought my Ethiopian Bible.
You did?
I did.
Is it in Ethiopic? Is it in Ge'ez?
No. I don't speak or read or write.
Ge'ez is a cool. All right. Deal. Book of Ethiopic Enoch next week. And I'm going to bring it to you and read it to you in Ethiopic. No, not the whole thing, but I can't read Ethiopic fluently, but I can read it enough to like pick out words.
One of the important parts tonight
Yeah.
is when you're reading this.
Go ahead, give it.
When you're reading this and you're reading it in the Old Testament,
Yeah.
you got to remember the time.
Yeah.
What were they thinking?
Right.
Because we were thinking of Christ and God,
Yep.
and they hadn't gotten here yet.
Yeah.
So if you're reading this, you have to remember the
Yeah.
time frame.
Right. A text without a context is a pretext.
Yeah.
That's stupid.
Thank you.
Somebody told me that one time. But it's always, it's why I do the historical study and stuff. And when you realize what time it is, what time it's being written and who is the audience, it helps you connect with the human part of the story. Other than that, it's reading stories from the book from Narnia. It's just fantasies. And a lot of people read the Bible like it's a fantasy book. And so when you talk about, with the history and it wasn't written here, it was written during the Maccabees, it really bothers them. I know I've lost people that just stopped. They said, you just went too far. You're saying it's not telling me that Noah wasn't written, the story of Noah wasn't written by Noah. I'm like, yeah, they didn't have video cameras back in those point. These are prophetic stories. And if you don't put them in context, sometimes you miss what the message is. Right? Handing off the kingdom forever. That's great. Wonderful. I sure appreciate you guys coming. I don't know if you can tell. It takes, I'll be a little bit glad in a couple weeks to take a break. I think I'm due. But it takes a bit of time to prep for these things. I don't have all of this just in my head. So it always makes a difference for people to show up online and watch it or to come on Wednesday night. So thanks for coming. Appreciate it. Yeah, well, I'm glad you're here too. Lord, thank you for your word. I just thank you, Lord, for my friends. Lord, it's just such a joy to just get to spend time in your word. And we give you the praise in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.